Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here today to talk about lettuce. Now, as you can see, at the time I'm filming this video, we are actually in mid-fall, so we're basically the end of October. It is starting to cool down out here, and one of the very few things that I have left in my garden that's still going strong, that I'm still getting a great harvest from, is lettuce. Now, I'm actually not planning to post this video until probably sometime in maybe February or March, around the time when people might be starting to think about starting seeds for the spring, because that is actually when I grow the majority of my lettuce. But in order to have basically a complete how-to about growing lettuce, I needed to film it earlier in the year so that I can really show you how my lettuce is doing. So I decided to go ahead and film this for you in the fall, even though, as I said, you'll probably actually be seeing this sometime in February or March. So right now in my fall garden, I actually have a fairly small patch of lettuce, but even though it's a small patch of lettuce, it is doing really well. It's nice and healthy, and I thought that it would still be a great time to really share with you guys all about how I grow my lettuce. So here in Connecticut, fall tends to be a little bit breezy, and today seems to be even a little breezy even for fall. So I'm hoping that there won't be too much wind noise for you guys, and hopefully you'll bear with me through the little bit of wind noise that we do have. So I love growing lettuce. Lettuce is actually, I would say, probably one of my favorite vegetables to grow in the garden, and there are a few reasons for that. One is that lettuce is just so fresh and delicious. There's nothing like harvesting those beautiful spring and early summer salads, you know, when you're just coming off a cold winter and you haven't been having food fresh from your garden. You know, I know here in America we have access to, you know, fresh food all winter long in the grocery store, but it's not the same. You know, it's not the same freshness, and it's not the same as going out to your garden and harvesting that food really fresh and getting to enjoy it from your own garden. So I just love lettuce because it's delicious. We eat a lot of salad in my family, and growing your own lettuce can save a lot of money. I also really enjoy growing lettuce because it's so easy to grow, and something that is so easy. And honestly, lettuce does not cost a lot to grow either. It's very low maintenance. You don't have to put a lot of input into growing your lettuce. So something that is delicious and refreshing, inexpensive, and really easy to grow just makes for a really rewarding combination. Another reason that I really like growing lettuce is that you can start it so early. Here in Connecticut, I usually plant my first batch of lettuce around the same time that I plant my spring peas, which that's going to vary a little bit depending on the weather that year. But I usually can plant my first batch of peas starting in mid-March to any time in April, and I usually plant my first batch of lettuce around the same time. Now, if you're going to start it early in the season like that, you want to choose a more cold-tolerant variety of lettuce. Lettuce in general tends to be more cold-tolerant than a lot of other vegetables that you grow in the garden, but even within that umbrella of lettuce, there's a lot of variety, and you'll find that some lettuces are more cold-tolerant or conversely more heat-tolerant than other types of lettuce. So definitely take that into account depending on the time of year that you are planting lettuce. So one of the reasons that lettuce is so easy to grow is that unlike a lot of other vegetables that you grow, lettuce does not have to be started inside. You know, tomatoes and peppers and a lot of other plants with longer growing seasons really benefit from getting an early head start inside the house. Lettuce, while you can start it early, I've never really found a need to start it early in the house. I just direct sow the seeds outside in the garden, and that makes it so simple to grow. You know, starting seeds inside, there's a lot to be said for it. That's not really the focus of this video, but there is a lot to be said for it, and I do enjoy it. But it's undeniably easier to grow plants like lettuce where you can just stick seeds directly in the ground and not have to worry about grow lights or seed starting mix or anything like that. You just buy a packet of seeds and stick it in the ground. Now, that's a bit of an oversimplification. It's obviously not quite that easy. You do want to have a good spot prepped when you're going to plant your lettuce seed. So, as you can see here in this garden, I have in-ground beds. You can also garden in raised beds. That would work really well too. Container gardening is another great option. But here in this garden, I just garden in the ground, and every year I amend this soil with a couple inches of compost. So I find that lettuce has, you know, it has pretty low maintenance nutritional needs compared to a lot of other vegetables. So I amend the soil with compost. I don't give it a lot of fancy fertilizer or anything like that. So as you can see from my small fall lettuce patch here, I plant my lettuce seeds really thickly. I don't worry about spacing or anything like that. So you can see between these lettuce plants, there is not a lot of space. I grow them really close together, and I pack a lot of lettuce into a really small growing space. So when it comes time to plant the lettuce in the spring, I really simply just make a little furrow in the ground. Just kind of take my hand, make a little furrow, and then I just sprinkle the seeds. You'll see I sprinkle them pretty thickly in that little space. I just pinch the soil closed over them. You want to pay attention to the seed depth recommended on your seed packet, which in the case of lettuce is, I think it's usually between 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. It's not very deep. And then you want to give it a nice water in. Sometimes I like to cheat a little bit by looking for a day where I know it's going to rain. I'll get out and I'll plant my lettuce before the rain, and then I'll let the rain water it in for me. That makes it even easier. I do find lettuce, along with other plants that you plant early in the spring, when it tends to be really cool out, they require a lot less watering than seeds that you're going to start later in the year. The soil in the spring tends to be pretty moist. That's obviously going to be area dependent. But, you know, in a lot of areas here in Connecticut, we usually have a fair amount of snow that's melted recently. We usually get a fair amount of rain in the spring. So if you're in an area that is warmer and drier where you don't have melting snow, you may have to water your lettuce seeds a little bit more. But here in Connecticut, you know, I water when the soil feels dry, when it feels like it hasn't rained in a little while. But honestly, I'm a pretty low maintenance gardener, and I find that my lettuce reliably grows really well. Now, I do want to go back to what I said about starting the lettuce. I know I mentioned in my area, I tend to start my lettuce in, you know, mid-March to sometime in April. That is going to be very area dependent. So what you're going to want to do, if you are gardening in a different area than me, is you're going to want to look up your last frost date. You're going to find out when the last frost is anticipated for your area. And a few weeks before that, you can plant your lettuce. So you're going to want to wait until the ground is unfrozen, until the soil is easily workable. But you can plant it fairly early. And what I like to do with my lettuce is I like to succession sow my lettuce. So pretty much as soon as the soil is slightly warmed up and workable, I get out here and I plant some lettuce seeds. And then what I do is I come back out in a couple weeks and I plant more lettuce seeds. And I keep going all the way through spring until we really get into summer and it starts to get too hot for lettuce. Now, when it gets too hot in your area is going to be very area dependent. You know, if you're in the south, if you have a warmer climate than mine, you might actually be able to grow lettuce all winter long. You might not have to wait for that first spring thaw to be able to grow lettuce. You may keep it growing all winter, and then you may have to stop growing lettuce earlier than I do. Because what happens is lettuce prefers a cooler growing environment. Now, how cold it can tolerate is going to be lettuce dependent, variety dependent. If you find lettuce varieties with names that include something like winter or anything to do with cold, there's a lettuce variety, for example, that I grow sometimes called North Pole. If you see a lettuce with a name like that, that is, you know, that's a little hint that that is a cold weather lettuce. You may also see one of my favorite varieties is called Marvel of Four Seasons. That is more cold tolerant and more heat tolerant than many other lettuce varieties. Now, depending on your area, you may be able to grow lettuce all summer. Here in Connecticut, we have pretty cold winters. We also get fairly hot summers. Now, I know it's nothing compared to what those of you in the South experience. But if you live somewhere like the Pacific Northwest, where it tends to be a little bit more moderate year-round, you may be able to grow lettuce year-round. That's going to be very area dependent. So as far as timing for growing lettuce, really your best bet is to find some local gardeners in your area to connect with. You can even join, I find Facebook has a lot of gardening groups specific to local areas. So if you join a group like that, you're going to find some really good advice as far as timing and as far as lettuce varieties that are really likely to thrive in your individual climate and your growing area. So now, back to growing lettuce. Once you've sown the lettuce seeds, depending on weather conditions, depending on temperature, things like that, it's probably not going to take your lettuce all that long to germinate. For the most part, I would say my lettuce that I sow outside germinates within a week to maybe 2 weeks if the weather is a little bit, if I've jumped the gun a little bit and the weather's a little on the cool side, it might take it closer to 2 weeks to germinate. but it's usually not going to take too long for the lettuce seeds to germinate. They'll germinate and you have these tiny little sprouts, and you have a couple options. If you want to grow big lettuce heads, you're going to want to thin out your seeds a little bit and give them a little more space. I will say I never do that for several reasons. One is that I just prefer baby greens. I like the taste and the flavor and the texture of baby greens in my salad. I also find that I get a really consistent yield that way. I get a really big yield that way. Now you can see behind me, I have hundreds of lettuce plants crammed into a tiny little space. I did not thin these at all. That's partly just, the low maintenance gardener in me, not wanting to spend time out here with a task that I don't really need to do. So you saw how thickly I sow my lettuce seeds. I sow them really thickly and I don't bother thinning them at all. So I'm gonna let them grow for baby greens. So when I go to harvest these lettuce greens, we're actually going to harvest a bowl of salad for dinner tonight in just a minute, and I'll show you exactly how I harvest these. I just go and I cut them right along the base. I leave probably a couple inches of leaf behind, and those are gonna regrow really nicely. Let's harvest a bowl and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So we're gonna harvest this lettuce using the cut and come again method. And I know you probably can't even really tell here, but I've actually already harvested this lettuce, and this is the regrowth. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our scissors, we're gonna go down to the base of the lettuce. I know I've got a little bit of fallen leaves here. We're gonna make sure not to get those in our salad. I'm going to cut around here, leave an inch or so behind to regrow, and we're just going to cut these and harvest them directly into this salad spinner here. So when I'm harvesting, I don't worry about harvesting from individual plants or anything like that. I just take a handful, just cut it off. We're gonna put it right in our bowl. And you can see how I left a little bit behind from these plants, and this will regrow. By leaving a little bit of the plant behind, I'm allowing the plant to keep enough energy, I'm allowing it to keep its root system, enough leaves to create food for the plant, and these are going to regrow. Now this time of year, in the fall, it's going to regrow much more slowly than it would in the spring. So I usually plant my lettuce seeds out in, as I said, mid-March to early April for my area. I usually start harvesting my lettuce sometime in May. And what I find is that time of year, it regrows so fast. This time of year, the daylight hours are a lot shorter and it's not going to regrow as fast for me, but it will still regrow to some extent. I'm just going to pull out this leaf that I got there. We're going to harvest a little bit of this variety too, because I like to have some variety in my salads. So I just want to point out, these spots here are where I just harvested. If you look over here, I harvested this a few days ago, and you can see it is starting to regrow some new leaves in here. So it won't actually take that long. This time of year, as I said, it'll take longer. But in the spring, it wouldn't actually take that long for these to regrow and look just like these larger plants again. I'm gonna look at this plant too, because I know I harvested from here somewhat recently. I can't see exactly, but you can see we have some new growth in there. I harvested from these plants, and you can see, you can't even really tell. So this is called the cut and come again method, because you can cut from the plants, they'll regrow, and you can harvest from the same plants, 3 or 4 times in the same season, depending on your weather conditions. Now, it will run out eventually, which is why, like I said, I like to I like to sow new lettuce rows, every couple weeks throughout the growing season. And that keeps me in a big supply of lettuce all season long. Now, let's talk about lettuce varieties. How do you choose which varieties to grow? Honestly, I'm going to say I have grown, over the course of my gardening career, dozens and dozens of lettuce varieties. I like a lot of variety in my lettuce. So you can see, even in my little tiny fall garden patch here, I have 3 varieties of lettuce growing. In the spring, when I plant a bigger lettuce patch, I have even more. These lettuce varieties that I have here, because we're going into winter, I planted specifically cold-tolerant lettuce varieties to try to get the longest season possible of this lettuce before it succumbs to the cold. So One thing you want to take into account when choosing lettuce varieties is the time of year that you're planning to grow it, and also the climate in your area. If you live somewhere in the south where it tends to be really warm, as I said, you may want to look into growing your lettuce over the winter, late fall, very early spring, those times of year. But you may also want to, especially if you want to expand your growing season, look into heat-tolerant lettuce varieties. Here in Connecticut this time of year, I'm planting cold-tolerant lettuce varieties. But in the summer, I plant more heat-tolerant varieties. So when you're browsing through a seed catalog, when a variety is exceptionally cold-tolerant or heat-tolerant, a lot of times there will be clues in the name, as I mentioned, but read the description of the different varieties, and often they will tell you if it is what's called bolt resistant. That means it's going to likely be a heat tolerant variety. You also want to just think about, what does your family like to eat? Now, as I said, my family likes to grow leaf lettuce. My family likes to eat leaf lettuce. Really, I think any variety of lettuce can be grown as a leaf lettuce. It just all depends on how you harvest it. So I grow varieties that are known as leaf lettuces. I grow butterhead varieties. I grow romaine varieties, but I harvest them all as leaf lettuces. So if I had to choose, I think my top 3 lettuce varieties would be, first of all, Buttercrunch. Buttercrunch is my favorite lettuce variety. That's a classic medium green. It's a butterhead type. I find that it has delicious, buttery smooth leaves. It has a nice, sweet flavor. It holds into the summer really well. I find that it's both more heat tolerant and more cold tolerant than the average lettuce. It is really reliable for me, so if I had to choose one, it would be Buttercrunch. I also really enjoy Marvel of Four Seasons for a lot of the same reasons. It's actually a very similar variety to Buttercrunch, but it has a little tinge of red to it. I like to grow a mix of both red and green lettuces. So those two I really love. I also really like to grow Black-Seeded Simpson. This is a really kind of paler, brighter green that I find does really well for me in early spring. Black-Seeded Simpson, at least in my area, is not heat tolerant, so I can't grow it all summer, but it does do really well in the spring and into early summer for me. So as I said, those are my 3 go-tos, but every year I'm probably going to grow about a dozen lettuce varieties. So don't be afraid. You know, a packet of seeds is a couple dollars. Don't be afraid to branch out and try any variety of lettuce that looks interesting to you. Just go ahead and give it a try. Now, I did mention bolt resistance being a positive quality in lettuce, so let's talk a little bit about what bolting means. Now, if you have not grown lettuce before, you are probably familiar with lettuce as you see it in the grocery store. A lot of times you may see leaf lettuce in one of those little clamshell packages, or you may see lettuce harvested as a whole head. Now, lettuce tends to grow that way in the ground to start with. In the beginning of the season, when lettuce is first growing and when it's young, it focuses all of its energy on leaf production. Once it gets to a certain point in its life cycle, this can be triggered just by the age of the lettuce plant, or it can also be triggered by heat in the summer, or it can be triggered by a lack of rain in the summer. Basically, all these signals that tell the lettuce, like, hey, your time is running out. You want to go ahead and you want to put your energy into making seeds, because that's how you're going to basically create the next generation of lettuce. Whenever a lettuce plant receives any of those signals telling it, hey, you need to switch your energy to seed production, it's going to stop focusing on all this beautiful leaf production that we have going here, and each lettuce plant will send up a single center stalk in the middle of the plant. That center stalk will ultimately get really tall. It will ultimately get flowers, and if those flowers get pollinated, they will ultimately turn into seeds. And that is how lettuce grows. So if you're interested in saving seeds, your lettuce plant's bolting is a positive thing. You let it go, and eventually you'll get these little seed puffs. They almost look like tiny little dandelion seed puffs. And you can save the seeds from those and save that for more lettuce for next year. So as I said, if you're looking for seeds, that's a great thing. If you are looking for your lettuce just to eat, that is not really a positive thing, because what happens when lettuce bolts, the flavor of the leaves turns really bitter, because your lettuce isn't focusing on making fresh new leaves anymore. It is focusing on making flowers that will ultimately turn into lettuce seeds. So that is one of the reasons, again, why I succession sow my lettuce. That basically means that every couple weeks I'm going to sow fresh lettuce seeds. That way, when the lettuce that I have on the ground, or that I have growing in the ground, gets to the time of year or the time in its life cycle when it's ready to start making seeds, I have new fresh lettuce that I can start harvesting. And then the original lettuce, I can either let it go to seed if I want to save some seeds, or if I want to basically feed the pollinators a little bit, I can let it go to seed. If I instead want to pull that lettuce out, I can put it into the compost pile, I can give it to my chickens, and then I can put something else in that spot to make the most use of the space possible. So one key to growing really successful lettuce, especially in the summer, is to make sure that it gets enough water. Now, lettuce, I know we've talked about bolting, and I mentioned that lettuce is more prone to bolting if it's been really hot or if it's been really dry. Now, there isn't really a whole lot we can do to control the temperature, but we can control the amount of water that the lettuce receives. If we've had a really dry summer, you know, this past summer I was blessed with a lot of rain and I very rarely had to water my garden. So that made it an extra low maintenance year for me, and I really appreciated that. But that is not the case every year. There have been many years when I've had to water my lettuce, you know, even multiple times a week. You know, I'm a low maintenance gardener and I don't come out to my garden and water every day. But when the temperatures really start to get hot and when that's combined with a lack of rain, lettuce really can benefit from getting some good watering. It's really unlikely that I'll have to deal with any lettuce bolting because, as I said, daylight hours are getting significantly shorter, days are getting cooler. This lettuce is not really going to be focused on making seeds at this time of year. For that and many other reasons, lettuce can be a really satisfying crop to grow in the fall. So I hope that that is a helpful rundown of how to grow lettuce from seed. Honestly, I think it is one of the easiest plants you can grow in your garden. And I will say, as with any other aspect of gardening, I can tell you how to do it. You can read how to do it in books. You can watch people do it. But honestly, the way that I find that you'll learn the best is just by doing it. A packet of seeds is a couple dollars. It's a much smaller investment than if you're going to go to a nursery and get started plants. And it's much less of a time investment than if you got some seeds that you had to start in your house. Lettuce is honestly one of the easiest plants to kind of practice gardening on, to learn how to garden, and it sets you up for a really high chance of success. So if you are an experienced lettuce grower and you have some lettuce growing tips that I missed, go ahead and leave those in the comments because we're all growing in different areas and I'm sure there are things that apply to the area that you may be growing in that don't necessarily apply to the area I'm growing in. So I would love to hear from you. If you have some lettuce growing tips that I missed, please go ahead and share those. If you have any questions about growing lettuce, please go ahead and ask those in the comments too. I'll do my best to help you, and hopefully some other experienced gardeners will chime in and give you some great advice too. So thank you so much for hanging out in my garden with me today. I really enjoyed taking a little look at this last little bit of fall lettuce, and I am really excited for my delicious salad that we get to enjoy this late October evening. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.